So far this unit, we have been simplifying and factoring polynomial expressions. Today, we're going to go into solving a specific example of a polynomial, and that is the quadratic. Quadratic just means a polynomial with exponent of 2. And we're going to solve them before we've just been simplifying. Solve means we have an equation or an equal sign. And what we want to do is we want to figure out what value of x, when you plug that number in, gives you 0. To solve for x, we use inverse operations just like a two-step equation we did earlier this year. The only difference is I'm adding one more step you have not seen before, and that is the step of square root. But let's get started. 2x squared minus 98 equals 0. We want to get x by itself. So how do we move a negative 98 to the other side? We do the opposite, so we add 98. 2x squared minus 98 equals 0. I need to add 98 to both sides. Oops. 98. So they cancel out here. And I'm left with 2x squared equals 98. So we did the first step where we added or subtracted. And the next step, now we have to divide, and we're going to divide both sides by 2. So that will give you that x squared equals 49. And then the last step, to get x by itself, we have to undo x squared. And the opposite of x squared is square root. So you're going to square root both sides. So x equals, the square root of 49 is 7. However, that's not my only solution. And that comes from this step right here. We want to know what number, when you square it, gives you a positive 49. Well, 7 squared is 49, but what other number, when you multiply by itself, gives you a positive 49? And that would be negative 7. If you square negative 7, you will also get a positive 49. So I have two solutions, x equals 7 and x equals a negative 7. Before we move on, make a little note to yourself that there is a possibility of having no possible solution. And that is, if at any point you're solving this equation, if you take the square root of a negative number, anytime you take the square root of a negative number, you will automatically know that it is a no solution. And let's think real quick about why. Let's think x squared equals negative 25. Let's say that was your equation. What number, when you square it, gives you a negative 25? There's no possible number because, let's see, 5 squared is a positive 25, and negative 5 squared is a positive 25. There is no number for x when you square it that will give you a negative number, so that just means that you can't do the inverse, you can't take the square root of a negative number. Here's our next example, 64x squared minus 4 equals 0. So let's go through the same steps. We want to first start with add or subtract, and since we have a negative 4, we're going to add 4 to both sides. So 64x squared minus 4 equals 0. We need to add 4 to both sides, and over here they will cancel out. And I'm left with 64x squared equals 4. Now, next step, I'm going to divide both sides by 64. Now, instead of actually doing 4 divided by 64 and getting a decimal, for now, I think I'll just leave it as that fraction, 4 over 64. And the only reason I'm doing that is because they're both perfect squares, and I'll show you what will happen when we take the square root. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. So x equals, you can take the square root of each number. The square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 64 is 8. And then now, that fraction can be simplified to 1/4. So, one of my solutions is a positive 1/4, and then the next one will just be the opposite, negative 1/4. Okay, here's another one. 2x squared plus 32 equals 0. Let's see, how do I move a positive 32 to the other side? I'm going to do the opposite, so I'm going to subtract. So I have 2x squared plus 32 equals 0. And I would like to subtract 32 on both sides to cancel out. So now I have 2x squared equals negative 32. So now divide both sides by 2. So x squared equals negative 16. And then last step, square root and square root. And biggest mistake, students automatically in their head think, well, the square root of 16 is 4. But you cannot take the square root of a negative number. So here is an example where there is no possible solution. Okay, here's the last example before we do the story problem. So let's just go through it quickly. X squared plus 4 equals 85. I want to move 4 to the other side. So x squared plus 4 equals 85. I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides, which leaves me with x squared equals 85 minus 4 is 81. And now there's nothing to divide by because there's no number in front of x squared. So I can go straight into square root and square root. So x equals the square root of 81 is 9, but then you also want the opposite, x equals negative 9. Suppose you are going to construct a circular fish pond in your garden. You want the pond to cover an area of 300 feet squared. What is the radius of the pond? Okay, let's think about this. What is the shape of the fish pond? It says it is a circular fish pond, and then they tell you what the area is, so you should automatically think, what's the area of a circle? Area equals pi r squared. So now let's think about the information they gave you and then the information we need to solve. They said that the area is 300, so you need to think about plugging in 300 for your A, and then we're solving for our radius. So 300 equals pi r squared. So how do we solve for r? Same thing that we've been doing using inverse operations. How do I get r by itself? I can divide both sides by pi. So r squared equals, for right now I'm just going to leave it as the fraction 300 over pi. And then last step, you need to square root both sides. So we want to square root the fraction 300 over pi. You should get that the radius will be about 9.8 feet. And usually when we're solving these types of quadratics, you always have the two solutions, positive and negative. But for this case, we're just going to ignore the negative one because you can't have a negative radius. and then right there is your solution. That's it for this lesson, so good luck!